Welcome to Starting a Technology Company. We'll cover week four today, and week four is really about validating your opportunity. So, the process that I kind of think about this is you come up with a bunch of ideas, you do an initial assessment of those ideas against a rubric or a framework, which is what we had talked about last week, to see if they're just a good idea, sort of mathematically or based against a bunch of rules. But once you have an idea that passes that, you then still need to go out and do some research to see, hey, is this actually a thing that will work in the real world? And what we find is that actually a lot of startups fail because they go after a market that doesn't exist. And so this week is all about that. It's really validating that a market exists for your opportunity, and it can be a great idea, but if people aren't willing to pay money for it, if it's not a problem that's actually critical to someone, it's not going to work as a business. And about half startups actually fail that because they pursue an idea that isn't worth actually pursuing. And by worth actually pursuing, mean here one that people aren't willing to pay money to solve. This is a good example of a challenge we had early on at my company, Level Access. We had pursued this problem, Section 508 compliance. We thought it was cool because there was a regulation, but the regulation itself wasn't actually aggressively enforced. It wasn't actually enforced at all. And so even though there looked like there was a good market there, if we had done research and gone out and interviewed people, we would have found out that actually it wasn't that significant of an issue in the market. And so that's what we're talking about today. How do you figure that out? This week, we're going to focus on a couple of different things, but really what we'll do is we'll help you understand what do we mean by validation and what are the different types of validation that people do. We'll talk a little bit about how you build some hypotheses for validation, and then we'll talk a good bit about how you actually do that discovery. All of this is really to help you understand, is this a business problem worth solving? Or if we take the time and energy and effort to actually build this solution, are people going to pay us money for it? And you can learn a lot of that up front. There's a couple of different concepts here that are related but separate. So, market research, that's pretty much what we did last week. That is, how big is the market? What are the areas within the market or segments we want to go after? What are the trends? Market research, most people do with books, and you can do research online and things like that. So it is data that you are finding out about the market, and it can generally be determined from databases or industry standard approaches. Market validation is actually going out and talking to people and gathering concrete evidence that people will pay for your solution. That is not something that you can do with a book. It is something you need to go to talk to your target customers about. And then much further down the line, there's a concept called product market fit. Product market fit is actually a stage of a company's life where you've built a product, you are selling it into a market, and you can prove that there is at least some set of customers, some area of the market where you can sell it to them effectively, you can retain those customers, and ideally they are referring you out. And so product market fit is you have a business that's actually working. Today, we're focused very much on the middle one, which is market validation. How do you figure out if people are really willing to pay money for that? And so we think of that as the process of saying, is there a actual tangible opportunity for a product, a service, whatever, in a very specific target market? So we are not validating the entire total addressable market. We're not even validating our service addressable market. We are just focused in, particularly here, on the ICP. So we're going to take this area of the market that we said, this is the area we can most likely win in. These are the people that have the biggest problems. These are the people that are willing to spend money to solve it. And we're going to go talk to them and see if we can gather real hard evidence that they will actually spend money on our proposed solution. If you have a solution that is targeted at consumers, that is monetized in a different fashion, gets monetized via advertising versus subscriptions, you may change the definition of that a little bit. Maybe you're looking for evidence that people will give you something of value, like their attention, and use it, or that they will reference over to some other shops. But ultimately, it's got to come down to something that's substantive and valuable that you can monetize as a business. And the most of the time, that's will people actually pay money for it. And the goal of all of this is go from, hey, I think this is a good idea and it scores well in the abstract, to people have told me they would pay X amount of dollars for a solution that looked like this. and then a little bit of logic on even how they would actually go about paying for that stuff. And it's a pretty critical step to really help you understand, is this a thing I want to go and build? And it's basically, in my opinion, the last step in that process, after which we'll turn a little bit more towards implementation activities in this course. We
Hey,
talked about the
Tim, can I
differences
ask
here.
a question
Yeah,
real
shoot.
quick? How do we get market validation if our idea is unique and essentially, like, I might not have the company behind me to build it out right away, but they do. Um, how do you protect your IP if you're talking to people who are actually in the business who potentially could use it, but also know that it's not available?
In general, I would encourage you to probably err on not worrying as much about the IP and exposing more of the concepts of the market, being thoughtful in how you do that. And so, to answer your question concisely, if you have a new product that doesn't exist yet, one business strategy is I cannot validate this in the market based on the requirements of this business and how it works from an intellectual property perspective, and I'm just going to go build it. The challenge with that is that's a much riskier proposition. So instead, most people would probably counsel you, and what I would counsel you to do is come at it from a similar service perspective or a hypothetical service perspective. Hey, we are thinking about a service that has X, Y, and Z potential benefits over the current approach. How much are you spending on the current approach? And then how much would you be willing to spend on this approach? Or would you be willing to change your spend from the current approach to a new approach? And so the concept that lays behind that would be, if it is a new budget that they have to allocate, you're going to have a very tough time validating a total new budget being allocated to a service that you can't describe. And so that's a pretty risky proposition. But if it is a current budget and you're only talking about, or you're talking about a service that does something differently, then what you would say is, what is the current budget? How much is that current budget? How do you decide how it's spent? And that gives you a lot of information about what they're trying to accomplish with the current spend. And then you could say, if you had a new thing that does X, Y, and Z, at a high level, the benefits of the product rather than the actual mechanics of how the product works, that would probably be enough to get you some reasonably good market validation.
Okay.
Because in the case of a replacement budget, is it worth switching is really the biggest thing. And switching costs tend to be the biggest challenge.
Yeah. Mine's sort of an add-on, so it's not necessarily changing lanes, but driving faster.
We talked about this earlier, so I don't think we have to cover this again. But again, validation, different than market research, different than product market fit. And our primary focus here will be in on market research. So, one of the ways to think about this, and I'll give you an example of this later, is that your idea for a business is based on a lot of guesses that you've made. And they're probably smart guesses, they're probably reasonably well informed guesses, but at the end of the day, they're guesses. And so, validation is a way to systematically go through the things that you have made as assumptions or guesses and say, is this true or is this not true? As an example, though, you need to make these as specific as possible. And they tend to fall into three categories. You've made some guesses or assumptions about a problem that you have. As an example here, let's say we had a video conferencing tool. One of the problem hypotheses we would make for video conferencing tools is remote teams have a difficult time with asynchronous communication, right? And so synchronous communication or video communication is a better way for remote teams to communicate. Pretty good theory, but a theory that we would have to validate. Another one could be a solution gap hypothesis, which is I am currently using tool X. If I have a new tool that does some new thing, that is a useful thing. The current tools are a problem for the users, et cetera. So it is the current tools don't do something, and there is a new thing that does something that is useful. Is that in fact useful? So solution gap. What's the current solution, and what are the challenges with that current solution? And then the last one we see a lot are value hypotheses, which is I'm going to price this at $10 a user a month. And my thesis is that people are willing to pay $10 per user per month. Or I'm going to price it at $20,000 a year. And my thesis is people are willing to pay $20,000 a year. And so this concept is what you'll hear referred to as validated learning. And that comes from a book by the guy named Eric Ries, The Lean Startup Framework. It's basically just this concept of you're going to come up with all of these different assumptions that you have about your business. And I'll give you some examples of this later on. And then what you do is you go through as you build out your interviews and you're trying to validate that those assumptions are real. The way that you can do that to actually validate these and turn them into testable statements would be first have a thought about what are the core beliefs that you have about your market, your problem, and your solution. Most of these will come into this first one, this problem hypothesis. Some may come in the solution gap hypothesis, but I'm going to go solve this business problem. So my assumption is that business problem is actually important enough for people to spend money on it. That is a very basic thing that you want to validate when you go out and talk to people. You then want to take these beliefs that you have and translate them into things that you can actually test. So it's different from saying, hey, this business problem is one I want to solve to this business problem is one I'm willing to pay $10 a month to. So that would be like a value hypothesis that you have. And that is also something you can test. You could say, would you pay $10 a month to actually solve this problem on a per user basis? And ultimately, you want these things to be as specific and concise as possible. So I don't want to say, as a member of the executive team, I struggle with generating a lot of business. That's true, but that is not very specific. What you might want to say is something like, as the VP of marketing for a mid-sized SaaS company, I need to generate, $1,000 of pipeline per day, or I won't be able to actually do anything. So that's specificity. Oh, and we have a little poll. If you want to try a poll too, you're welcome to respond to that. We're using polls for the first time, so give it a go. Yep, I would agree. So, of the three options there, you got a business idea. What do you do first? Trust your gut and start building. Not great. Ask people if they like it. Helpful, but not as good as validate if they'll actually pay for it. I've done the build first, figure it out later. That's not recommended either. So you have a bunch of these assumptions you've built into the business. Again, I'll do some examples later on, and it's easy once you see the examples of things you're making as assumptions. And so ultimately what you do is we take these assumptions, be they problem assumptions, solutions assumptions, or value and growth assumptions, and we're basically just going out and interviewing around those. First thing we're going to do is prioritize them though. And basically the things that could kill the business, those go first. And then everything else pretty much comes after that. And the things that can kill the business are not with money for your solution. People will not adopt your solution even if it's amazing. It's the fundamental things that have to do with how do you get cash into your business. Those are almost always the most important things that you want to look at in the business itself. So I'll give you kind of a real world application. Dropbox was founded by a guy named Drew Houston, and he was focused on validating this idea of people would buy a third party service that syncs files across devices. And so his approach to validating things, as an example, was not to go out necessarily and just do interviews. He was like, okay, well, the first thing I want to know is would people actually use a third party service to do file syncing? So why don't I just put up like a 3-minute video and see if people will sign up for them? And if they sign up for it, it means they're probably willing to actually use a service like this. And so that is a very, very simple example of market validation. The other point there is it doesn't have to be interviews. It's a lot of different things that you can use to ultimately triangulate and validate that this business concept is something that people are actually willing to spend money for. In this case, it worked out quite well. Not only did people sign up for it, that sign up then drove various aspects of the go-to-market motion later on because they had a big list of people that were signed up for it. And in fact, early sign-up activities like that, private beta programs work really well. So that's the first chunk, which is about build a list of testable hypotheses that you have, which are the assumptions that you have. Then the question becomes, okay, how do you validate those or invalidate those hypotheses? And by far, the gold standard here, the way to do this is going to talk to customers. In this case, they're obviously not currently customers, they would be prospective customers. So you take the personas that you're targeting, we talked about last time, you take your ICP, and in that, you try to find as many people as possible that you can talk to. The general rule of thumb is you want to do about 100 of these interviews. But 1 is better than 0, 5 is better than 1, 10 is better than 5, and so on and so forth. So do as many of them as you can. And as you do the interviews, your concept of the business will naturally refine itself. The thing that you're looking for in the interviews is sort of in four different areas, and they roughly align with the solution hypotheses that you have. First one is you really want to understand the problem. Does the customer think this is a problem that's worth solving? Are they willing to spend time to adopt some sort of new software tool or new solution for it? How does the problem show up in their life? Is it an actual challenge for it? What is the context in which we need to solve the problem? How do they currently address it? So, what is the solution they currently use? What is the gap set in that solution? What do they not like about current solutions? And then one of the questions I always like is if you could wave a magic wand, how would you actually solve this? What is the solution you would envision in your head as the ideal solution to this? Customer interviews can also have a degree of price discovery, but I'll give you a little warning on price discovery in interviews in 1 second. In general, what we do for customer interviews is we run them in sort of like this 5 step process. So, first, we go into our ICP and we're just focused on personas. It's great that you have validated this with your family and friends, and they will tell you it's a great idea. Those are not the people who are actually validating your business model. The only people that can validate whether or not the business works are people that are actually potential customers for you. The other thing is obviously your friends and family will tell you it's a good idea, even if it's a terrible idea. The market will have no problem telling you if it's a terrible idea. How you would go about finding those people: reach out to your existing networks. You can use alumni groups, you can use professional groups, LinkedIn groups, Slack communities. Those are often the best places to go and recruit folks. And it as simple as I'm doing a 15-minute research call. I just want to learn about background and experiences. It's not for a specific product. It's just trying to learn more about it because you are fundamentally just trying to learn more about what is a challenge they have in this area. Do they care about? Are they willing to spend money on it? And maybe some information to shape the approach that you have. When you go into the interview, first thing you do is ask, hey, is it okay to record it? If we're going to use it for internal research purposes, it won't be published anywhere, et cetera. So get consent to do that. Then you do give them a little background on the problem space. Here is the problem we're trying to solve. We're not like focused on the solution now. We're just trying to understand, is this a problem we want to go after? Learn a lot about, do they see this as a challenge? How does it show up in their life? And generally speaking, you want to let them talk as much as possible. Based on that, understand what are they currently using to solve it. And then if all of that goes well, ask them to actually give you some references to other folks in the market. What you don't see in there is much about the solution. Because really what we're trying to do is understand the problem really well and what is the challenge with the current approach that they have to solving the problem. And if the problem is important enough for them to spend money on it or time on it, or it has a big emotional aspect to it, that potentially supports a real business. But if the business problem is not something important enough for them to spend real time, real energy, or real effort on, that will not support a real business on a long-term basis. We have a concept called the evidence ladder, which goes into one of the things we was talking about before, which is pricing. The key thing here is not all evidence is equal. And by far the weakest thing that you will get from a customer is, sounds cool, it sounds neat, I'd like to try it. They're very, very nice statements to hear, but they don't really carry a lot of weight. What is more important than that is what they actually do and what they have strong reactions to emotionally. And then even the best thing, even better than that, the best thing is what they actually spend money on. And so a revealed pain is, I talked to this person for 15 minutes and they said no more, no less, they hated sending emails to new prospects. That would be a good example of a strong revealed pain. They really don't like doing this and they keep coming back to it as a problem. And they're clear about why they don't like it and what they have to do to deal with it in their day to day life. Even stronger than that is how they actually behave. And that can be introducing you to someone else. That can be signing up for something with you. It can be spending time in a beta. If you handed somebody a piece of software and said, hey, here is an initial copy of our software, it's a beta copy, and they spend an hour playing with it and giving you feedback, that is a strong sign that they are very engaged. It is certainly a much stronger sign than spending 15 minutes on the phone with you and talking about themselves. And then the most significant commitment you can get is I'm actually going to pay money for it. The ideal situation here is they have prepaid for your software. Very rarely we'll get that, but you might get them to sign a letter of intent. Hey, if we build this thing, will you actually buy it? They may give you some early budget to allocate for a pilot, as an example. And ultimately, those are the strongest signs and indicators that this is a problem they want to solve. And the idea here is again, what we're looking for is not their nice opinions and what they want. What we're looking for is, are they actually going to spend money on this? And the stronger that commitment is, the higher the confidence interval we have in the evidence that this is a real business problem. We talked a lot about doing standard interviews, and I'll show you some scripts for those and how we generate those scripts in a sec. There is another model that you can do these days, which, in my opinion, is quite useful. And in the future, this may actually become much more of a standard part of the process. But for now, it's kind of on the edge of people doing it. Here, what we do is synthetic interviews. So we take a large language model, we take a bunch of people from our ICP, and we basically say to the large language model, here is a person that I want you to simulate being, or I want you to impersonate, depending on how the LLM accepts it. I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions, respond as them. It is a pretty good way to help you refine and focus real interview questions. So while it's not as good as talking to real world people, it can be helpful if you ask five different LLMs the same question with five different people each. So 25 times you ask this question across variations of people and LLMs. If you get the same answer, it probably means that that is the answer that you're going to get in the real world. And so it can help you take a long interview and make it a relatively short interview. And it can help you validate some of the stuff that you have. The thing I would be very cautious about is it being an indicator of demand. And the reason for that is that programmed to be, for lack of a better term, obsequious, but certainly deferential to you as the user. And so if you go in and the tone of your questions is, hey, I think this is a good idea, the LLM will actually reflect back to you, that sounds like a great idea. You should totally do that. Because that is how they are programmed to work. They are programmed to give you positive feedbacks. So just a note of caution. That said, if you can correct for that, you can get some pretty powerful stuff. There are other methods of also validating stuff. You can do surveys. These can be useful, particularly for consumer markets. If you want to segment out data in your market by like job title or company size, you can do all those with surveys. These tend to be larger scale activities, and they're not as good for small companies as direct interviews of customers, but they can be useful if you're going after hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. You can also do observational research. Observational research is just you go see someone working on the business problem that you have, and you just watch them actually do stuff. So you see what steps they actually have to go through to accomplish sending out an invoice, as an example. And then you see where the pain is in that, and that can be quite useful in designing your solution. We are positioning them here, though, as secondary techniques because, again, the gold standard technique is doing prospective customer interviews, going out and talking to prospects and seeing if they would actually spend money on the solution that you have. We'll go ahead and jump into actually, I think let's do this. Let's talk about how we're going to do this. So you'll get an assignment from this week about a couple different things. One is discovering the assumptions that you have, prioritizing the assumptions that you have, coming up with an interview outline, and then actually running a simulated interview. And as I mentioned, right, LLMs are great for helping you refine things, but just be careful with them. The other thing is make sure to not paste private customer data or confidential information to external models, because that'll go across the wire quite easily. But let me actually show you what this looks like, because that will be more interesting than anything else that we're doing. So for LLMs, I'm just using ChatGPT. You can use whatever you want out there. And so I started off by telling ChatGPT, hey, you're a startup customer discovery analyst. Ask me for a business concept and I'll give it to you. And then using that concept, go through and pull out all of the assumptions that I have in there that are critical, classify them into business problem assumptions, customer assumptions, workflow, current solution assumptions, willingness to pay assumptions, and so on and so forth. And then you can give me some evidence associated with that. And then you can give me some facts that I'm looking for. And then also suggest some ways to actually validate that in an interview. And the concept here that I pasted in for the business concept is something called Forginal, which is a piece of software we're building that helps you do actually all the stuff that's in this course. And so it helps you create what we're saying is a factory for B2B SaaS applications. So if I then go down and look at that and it says, okay, extracted customer discovery options. So you get a lot of concepts that I have in the business that have not been spelled out. So one assumption that I have as an example is an early stage B2B SaaS founder, let's say everyone on this call or an aspiring founders are going to actually want to start with a 1 or 2 page business concept or 1 or 2 sentence business concept, right? Um, Maybe they don't know how to summarize their idea. Maybe they need more structure on it. Another assumption that I have is users want a system that turns a short concept into a business plan, right? Maybe the users say they only need one piece, like they only want to build the product specs or they want to do pitch material, right? And the list goes on from there with various different assumptions that I have made. So this prompt is available. We'll send it out to you. It's part of the PDF, so you can look at it. But pretty much, this is what I do when I am thinking through a new business idea. All I will do is I will take the idea, hand it to an LLM, have them analyze it, look at the stuff that comes back, and then think through what do I think are the actual critical items in this in a narrow scope. So have it generate a lot of different ideas across a relatively big bell curve, and then you can review it. What I do here, though, is I also say, okay, go through all the things you just told me, and then tell me what you actually think are the most critical things. And so the LLM says, like, the most critical assumptions here are people actually care about being able to take a short concept and turn it into a full business plan, because that's your core value proposition. Another assumption that you have as an early stage B2B SaaS founder is the one that really cares about this most. Another assumption is that this is actually painful and people care about solving this with software. And another assumption is a user's background is useful in actually evaluating startup ideas. So some of these I believe, but it's worth actually going out and validating that my belief is something that other people actually agree with, or particularly the people in my target market agree with it. And it's given me some ideas on clarifying questions. So then what I do is I say, okay, if those are the things I want to validate, write me up an interview format that covers consent and context, problem validation questions, the rough outline that we had earlier, and give me some ways to actually run those interviews. So it covers, the 3 things we want to validate, getting consent at the top, and then problem validation, assumption validation. And so then you can go and obviously modify that. And then to close the loop, what I basically do is I say to the LLM, okay, now go ask yourself all the questions that you just told me and run through this process with a particular persona. So in this case, I say, have the persona be the technical founder of a B2B SaaS startup. Give yourself 20 minutes. Don't be nice, be direct, try to understand things. And then give me a printout of what that actually looks like. And so we could probably skip consent and context. But as an example, if we go to a B2B SaaS founder and say, what is tedious, boring, or difficult as it relates to the business problem we have, right? When you have a new startup idea, which parts of turning it into a real company feel most tedious and boring? The annoying part is not writing it down. The hard part is figuring out whether anyone has an urgent enough problem to change behavior, which I would agree with. That is the biggest problem you have. Customer discovery is tedious because people are polite and vague. They'll say something interesting and that means almost nothing. Translating that into a narrow product wedge is hard. Everyone wants to add more features because every prospect asks for something different, right? So, like, that's actually a pretty good answer to the problem of, like, what is actually a challenge in starting a new company. And then the list goes on from there. So then you can see what is the current solution, who's responsible for that, how much do you currently spend on it, how much time do you spend on it, and so on and so forth. And as you go through this, then you can understand, hey, like, am I on to something when I simulate a discussion with someone in the market? And then it will also give you a lot of information about what is the current environment that startup founders are acting. So, right, what do you use today to turn a rough concept into a more complete plan? Notion, Figma, AI tools, and conversations. Those are all of the things that are practically done. And why do you use them? Because they're cheap, they're fast, and I can control all the aspects of it. I actually don't want a black box necessarily for my system, right? What would cause you to use it? Well, if it was free and cheap, maybe I'd use it, but I'm not going to pay for something unless I actually know that it works well. Okay, that's pretty good feedback. So in this case, I would tell you, like, right, the if you were to go through this whole process for Forginal, one of the things that we have found as we have done both synthetic interviews and real interviews is technical founders may not be the best market for us. They may actually be too sophisticated to want to use a tool-based approach, and in fact, it's better to have non-technical founders as the target for that, as an example. So that is all that we have for today, actually.